Alright, let's talk about this thing. So this is the first bike that I ever made. This video is going to be just talking about everything that I did for it and the how and the why and all the mistakes I made. One of the first points, and probably one of the biggest points that's going to come up a lot in this video, is the design of this bike. So if you want to know how bad it is, the only drawing that I have of this bike or design is actually behind me on this piece of paper. Because I designed it two-dimensionally in just the free version of AutoCAD and kind of went from there, and I kind of sort of knew the geometry that I wanted, but I also mixed that with the last bike that I rode, and it kind of shows because there's a lot of mistakes on this and just, you know, the usual stupid rookie mistakes. Probably the biggest mistakes I made were the seat tube angle and the bottom bracket height. Those were the most painfully obvious riding because it just was not comfortable to pedal. And I was constantly doing pedal strikes everywhere. And that was just a rookie mistake, as simple as the bottom bracket height. Well, I did not draw the bike sagged. So that's the thing, whenever you're designing bikes and drawing them, you need to design it with the rider on it, because that's how the bikes get used, is with us riding them. And so what that means with the fork that I had on here is it's about, what is it? Well, it's 30% sag, so in this case it was about, I think, 50 something millimeters. And so that lowered the bottom bracket an extra, I don't know, 20, 25, somewhere in that range. But in other words, it was terrible to pedal. I hated it. and the seat tube angle actually changed after the fact. And you can see it in the pictures. It just does not look right. You know, the seat tube is entirely too far away from the tire. And, well, yeah, it just doesn't look right. And that was that just goes back to I didn't have a solid design before I started. And so that was something I changed at the last minute. Another big issue I made was cable routing. So I'll have to show some close-ups of this, but on the seat stays especially, the cable routing was kind of, you know, I built the bike after the fact. I was like, oh yeah, I got to put cable guides on here, and just slapped them on wherever it looked right. And these up here at the top of the seat stay especially were the worst. The cables came right down basically by the edge of the tire, and you know, we're at risk of buzzing all the time. And for the dropper routing, you know, where I cut it into the seat post here, another wonderful rookie mistake. I did not make this hole until after I built the bike. And so I had to get my drill in here around the down tube, figure out how to shove it in there so it's off center, which, you know, again, just another stupid mistake. And then also another one, and this is going to be a topic between this bike and then the Mark II version of this bike, was the reach and the stack measurements for the frame, because I basically just went off of the old bike that I used to ride for a long time, which again I'll have to show you pictures of, but it was just a 26er single speed, you know, Soma analog was the frame. You know, it's basically more of a cross-country bike, and so I kind of just wanted to stick with the numbers that I already knew, even though that was a terrible decision for a bike like this. And so, again, that's going to be a recurring topic, just talking about bike sizing in general. Just some more of the random stuff about this bike. I went with 27.5 inch tires. They were 27.5 by 2.6, front and rear. And the one and only reason I went with 27.5 was due to the extra clearance. You know, the extra 19 millimeters, 3/4 of an inch of clearance, because the biggest problem with any modern mountain bike is right around the bottom bracket, the chainstays, the cranks, and the tire all have to fit in the same general area. So since this bike, I've actually been using these guys. This is the QDW yoke from Lycan Precision. These things are amazing. It's almost like cheating because you just get to basically slap it on there and they're so easy to work around. I forget all the exact numbers, but I think it's something, well, on my wife's bike that I made, we have 29er by 2.5 on a 415 chainstay. And it also clears I think we have a 34 tooth chainring on there. But these things are absolutely well worth it. I'm definitely going to have to talk more about these on the Mark II bike as well because they're just awesome. But again, so the 27.5, I know what you're thinking, and we're going to have to do a whole video just about tire size. But the only reason I did was for the extra clearance. There's absolutely no reason for any of my future bikes to use that. They're all going to have to be 29ers. It's just, you know, tire size is not necessarily a driving dimension on a bike. The part spec for this bike, and again, I have the frame here. I'm entirely too lazy to take all of the parts off of my bike right now and build this back up. So I'll just have to show pictures of it. But like most of my bikes, I just tried to keep it sensible. I had some leftover parts from my last frame, and I, obviously bought the new wheel set, stuff like that, and the new fork and things like that. But again, it was just I try to keep on all my bikes, it's kind of, it's nice to have the really luxurious parts occasionally, but honestly, I just want performance and value. So, I try to stick with that and just go somewhere in the mid-range. That's a whole other discussion, but usually somewhere right in the middle is always the best. Now, the paint for this bike was fun. This is a rattle can Rust-Oleum paint job, and I'm actually pretty surprised at how well it turned out. First few rides I did with this frame, I was so unsure about it, I didn't even bother painting it. I just went out and rode it raw steel and had a good time and let it rust a little bit. But the Rust-Oleum paint, it's actually surprisingly good if you take your time on especially the primer. So you spray the primer, get it as smooth as you possibly can, sanding it down and everything, and then do the color over top. And I mean, it works fine. The biggest problem though is the durability. It's pretty soft. So a lot of the stuff around like the chain stays and things where my feet rub and, cables and all that stuff, it does flake off. So it's, if you just want to put together a bike and have fun, it'll work fine. But for a long term, it's not that great. After this bike, I went to powder coating everything, which I did myself. And that's, again, I'll have to talk about that on the next bike. Another little detail, it's just some of the pieces and parts that I've got on this bike. So the seat tube bent I bought from BFS, or Bicycle Fabrication Supply, as well as the bottom bracket shell, which is just a BSA, and then a 44mm head tube, which is these guys. And then the main tubes, the top tube and the down tube, are, I don't know if this is the right pronunciation, but Data Chai tubing. And the reason that chose that decision was it was the only tube I could find that was long enough for this down tube. The chain stays and seat stays here are just straight gauge 4130. I want to say these are, what are these, 5/8? I don't have anything handy. So yes, here we go. Yeah, these are 5/8, top and bottom. Again, because I just didn't know what I was doing. So these are 5/8 tubes, and they're a bit thicker on the wall thickness than you would normally do. I want to say the chain stays I went around somewhere in the 54 thousandths. That sounds right. But yeah, that's kind of not the right way to do it all around. And then these dropouts are also from BFS, which I really like. They're kind of a modular system, which I thought was cool. But again, this bike, I only took it on a handful of rides, and then I I was immediately already designing the second bike, so that should, doesn't really make much sense there. And then it's worth noting, I did an ISO mount for the rear brake, and again, I'll put a close up here, but it just doesn't really work that well with these dropouts. It kind of, I don't know, you'll see what I mean. It just doesn't quite look right. And the cable guides are just the basic, basic braze-ons, which I welded because I don't have a brazing setup. And I've already stole a couple because I ran out on my second bike. Yeah, I ran out of them, so I stole a couple off here to finish it out. And that is, I think that's all the little details, at least the ones I can think of right now. Moving on from that, I've been critiquing this bike the whole time, which is entirely too easy. I want to talk about the cool stuff. So, first of all, I actually made this bike. I mitered all the tubes and everything by hand. So I made my really terrible frame jig and put it all together just by hand, of fitting the tubes up. And I don't remember off the top of my head, I'll put a link up, but there's a website I found where you can plug in the sizes of your tubes and the angle, and then you can print a template to wrap around the tube, and then you just file it to match that, which that helps tremendously. So I'll have to put that one up, because that honestly is a really good option if you just want to make your first bike and have fun with it. So also, to go along with that, I can talk about all the bad things and stuff that I've learned since this bike, but this guy, well, it hangs up in its place of honor right back here above my workbench, because this is the first bike I ever built, and it's what started this whole endeavor and has just been awesome. And I'm really critical of it now just because I've learned so much since this bike, but this thing did ride really good. Other than the seat tube angle was a little uncomfortable and wasn't really sized right for me, I did really like the way this thing rode. It was a lot of fun, and I took it on some of the really awesome trails around here. But yeah, so that's like I said, this bike, it's going to be hanging up in my shop for forever. It has its place of honor, so I can always look on it. Next time we're going to talk about this thing. That'll be fun.